This podcast provides a platform for our guests to express their own personal views and opinions. Some or all of these views and opinions may not be shared by Ben and/or Yoel.
Welcome to the Too Dad to Quit podcast,
the podcast where we highlight stories of dads on the other side of divorce
to inspire and give strength to dads going through it.
I'm Ben.
And I'm Yoel.
So thank you everybody for coming back to the podcast. We have a really, really interesting guest this week. And we're actually at the long interview, so our longest yet. So we're going to break it into two parts. But before we do, I want to remind you to please subscribe, like, share, comment. We want your feedback. We want to help you. We want to help share your story. We're here to help you. The community is here to help you. And we're really excited for this interview. And we think it really has some great strength. So we have Judge Joe Hochheiser, who I've known since he was in college, and I've seen him go through a big journey in his life. And then this interview actually is our longest yet, so we're going to break it into two parts. The first part is basically his background leading up to his divorce. He was married for 10 years. He basically followed what was expected of him from his family, from what he believed was the right thing to do. And then after 10 years of marriage and two kids, they both decided that it wasn't the right thing. And, this is the majority of part one. And we do veer off into many different topics. And Joe is a deep thinker, a introspective guy. And I was so excited to have him on because I haven't spoken to him, length for a very long time.
Yeah, and something that I really fed off his energy. He just had so much energy. You can see how happy he is. He's happily remarried, and something also that I think is going to be very valuable to our audience is the fact that he has experience in some very real issues that a lot of men unfortunately face, including the whole idea of domestic abuse allegations and how that plays out. And there was, like you said, Ben, there was just so much context there. There's so much to learn from him. But really what stands out for me was just his energy and seeing how he's really made a life for himself post-divorce. He's happy and enthusiastic and energetic. And on a personal note, he really fed our egos, I think, by asking us a lot of questions, which was a rarity for our guests. But I really enjoyed being challenged with the questions that he had for us.
Yeah, we don't want to make this intro too long, so let's just get into it because this is going to be 2 episodes of awesome. We're here with Joe Hochheiser. He's got married when he was 21 years old. He was divorced 10 years later at the age of 31. He got divorced in 2014. He had 2 kids. His kids are now 16 and 10. Since 2014, he has co-parented with his ex-wife, watched that fall apart, been back to court with his ex-wife to get more custody of his son, got remarried, all while trying to maintain and repair a good co-parenting relationship through the troubles and tribulations of COVID and real life. In addition, he is a domestic violence magistrate judge in his county with a keen awareness and training in the cycle of violence, perpetrator behavior, and manipulation and control within intimate partner violence. Wow. So
I didn't know you would be reading that when I wrote that. But thank you. Thank you for that.
Was that read? I don't know. I think that was off the cuff, wasn't it, Ben?
Yeah, no.
We were reading anything.
A lot of big words in there. I apologize.
That's all right. And if that's not cool, I can edit that out and we can do a much slimmed down version.
It's all good.
So on a personal level, Joe, we go way back. He actually worked for me for a stint. Always had a bundle of energy. And when he came into a room, everybody knew he was there. And it's been pretty awesome watching from a distance where you've been. But we really haven't, had a catch up in a really, really long time. So I'm hoping that this will catch me up and we can, get back to where we used to be, super, super tight. And so I'm really excited that you took the time to be here.
Absolutely. Long Island NCSY 2021 through, I'm sorry, 2001, 2, and 3, I believe it was.
Sounds about right.
Oh,
Um,
about
yeah,
right.
and then you kind of disappeared, and then
Yes.
you reappeared, and then you disappeared again, and then you showed up as a lawyer, and then I lost track, and then you turned into this like GQ model, and it's
I, w-
and
I,
then
I was not in prison.
right. So let's start there. Not being in prison, but you've been in a whole lot of different places. So we like to start with kind of your background and what made Joe Joe, and where you're from. You're from Detroit, I believe.
Yes.
But kind of what's your family like, what's schooling, um, yeah, etc. How would you what made you your personality, and who are your influences and things like that?
I mean, Ben Stern, obviously, but I like to say that I'm the most interesting person that you never knew that you never knew. I grew up in Detroit, traditional black hat family. Both my parents are Baal Teshuvas, became religious through youth group NCSY. And my father kind of to the right, my mother to the right, grew up one of six. Uh, Great family, all very diverse in growing up, a very accepting household within the restrictions of kind of like the black hat household. My parents would kind of give their shirt off their back for any stranger on the street. At our Shabbos table, you had Jews, non-Jews, people of different sexual identities, orientation, religious levels, and like everyone's accepted. But kind of like in a lot of Jewish families, it's like when it's kind of one of their own kind of goes their own path. It's harder for them to accept a different path of one of their own children than to accept people in the community. So I went through high school, kind of a couple ups and downs, went to 3 different high schools. But my brother was worse. So that kind of gave me a little bit of opportunity
Hmm.
to get away with some things, because I'm like, hey, at least Yudi didn't do that. So I ended up going to Israel, went to 2 schools in Israel. Israel's definitely not for everyone, but I definitely had fun. For yeshiva, I'm not saying living there. And I came back from Israel, was on kind of my own religious path, but I was very passionate about education, about inspiration from my parents' upbringing through NCSY youth group, and also kind of the way that my parents ran their household was very into inspiring others. So I started doing junior NCSY, which where junior NCSY, if you can be inspirational and if you could be a motivation in a positive way, someone's religious level doesn't play that big of a role into it, as long as you can obviously act a certain way. But if you're able to motivate people and inspire, that's kind of the objective. So I became very involved in junior NCSY. That was 2002-ish. But because of my family background, I was 20, 21. And, obviously after high school, you go to Israel. And after Israel, you go and you try to find someone to marry. It was kind of that is, even though I wasn't necessarily on that black hat path, that was what I thought I should do. And I met a woman girl. She was, at that point, I think she could buy me alcohol. I don't know. She was probably 20, 21. And, we were both NCSY advisors in Central East NCSY. I was living in Long Island at the time. And I kind of thought that marriage was, why not? I met someone I can get along with. We're the same hashkafa level, which is kind of what the rabbis told me. Like everything, you don't fall in love, you fall off cliffs. You learn how to love people. And everything else was just like, oh, if you get along and you're on the same hashkafic level, you get married. Well, 21, it was actually July 4th, which was 2 weeks after my 21st birthday. So I was officially 22. Old sage at the time. Was in college, didn't even graduate college yet. And I would like to think that I was the person who I thought I would be as an adult. And she was the person who thought she would be as an adult. but we were both not adults, and we were both not that person who we said or thought that we were. Kid came, fast forward, kid came around 2.5 years later, three years later. It was, we went to marriage counseling at some point, and the marriage counselor was like, think back to the time where you truly loved each other and try to recreate that moment. And my ex and I, we kind of like both look at each other and gave like a little chuckle. It's like, it was never that great. Like it was because we thought that we should do it, or we thought it was cool, or how many hits on Only Simchas, or how many comments can you get? How many people are going to be at our wedding? Towards the end of our marriage, we had another child. There's a 6-year separation, and we were divorced a couple years after she was born. And as I said, it's been a crazy couple of years for everyone. But it's been for divorced people, COVID did not make anything easier. That is definitely for sure. As I don't exactly know, Yoel, your kids, or Ben, the age of your kids, puberty doesn't help either. Kids become a certain age and they're complete a-holes. Let's just say it like that. Even in the best of situations, and kids growing up is difficult. Raising kids is hard. I would like to think there are some advantages. My son jokes. He's like, yeah, I got 2 houses now. If I don't like one, I can go to the other. It's not that easy, kiddo, but like there are certain advantages. If the kid's having a bad day, really bad day, sometimes a change of scenery is a good thing. Trying to look for the positive. I think I've done that, but that's kind of my elevator speech in like 4 minutes.
Okay, so some clarifications for people listening. NCSY stands for National Conference of Synagogue Youth, which is basically just a youth group for kids from 5th grade through high school. Hashkafa means mindset. So I think Joe was saying they kind of had the same idea of what they both wanted in life, and that's why they took the dive. Were you guys living in the same place, like always in Cleveland, or where were you living during this time?
So I was living in Queens. Well, I was living in Merrick, Long Island, and Queens, Long Island, and she was living in Cleveland, Ohio, and we would see each other kind of once a month. I think we dated for like maybe 5 months before we were actually married, but we knew each other for a year. So in our brain, we like justified like, oh yeah, but we known each other for a year and a half. But really, there are many Orthodox Jews who get married very quickly. There are many Orthodox Jews who date for years. But the mindset or the philosophy that we were under, it was no living together before. It was you date to get married, and you kind of pull that trigger. But we also didn't spend a lot of time together. 1 weekend a month, and next thing you know, we're living in a 1-bedroom apartment.
And that was in Cleveland you guys lived?
Yes, in Cleveland. I continued to work, go to college, work for youth group. And then until I went to law school, I had a whole bunch of like odd end jobs because, being newly married and broke really helps bond that incredible bond that people have.
Right. So you guys, and then you had like a crazy education story. Was that all after? Or, because I only knew you in undergrad, and I don't even know if you finished. And then you kind of you disappeared.
I did finish undergrad. I graduated from Touro College. I had to get my final credits in Cleveland, Ohio, because, Touro is great. I went to night school in Brooklyn, and I took those transcripts. I got a couple extra learning credits. I learned in Kollel for 6 months to get those credits. My father would be proud. And then I worked for a couple of years, and then I went to law school at night while doing property management during the day. And then I got a job as a county prosecutor, primarily prosecuting all different types of criminal cases, but that was in 2010. So we're kind of fast forwarding. Definitely not a big lawyer job making 6 figures. I was, at the time I was getting paid not great. but it was something I was passionate about. I was a domestic violence magistrate, prosecuting drug cases, attempted murder, rape, and I absolutely just fell in love with giving a voice to those who didn't have a voice. It's kind of something I grew up with, about giving to those who cannot, who do not have for themselves. It's an addiction. I mean, giving is an addiction. Normally, it's a good thing, but long hours, obviously, not a lot of money coming in. When I was at night school, my wife at the time and my son used to bring me dinner at law school, because I would be working 40, 50 hours a week, go to law school at night, and then over the weekends, Sundays or Saturday nights, even, I would go to the library and study. So the only time I saw my son was when we did dinner or over the weekends. I did that through my divorce. And then after my divorce, I saw an ad for the United States military, and it was always something I wanted to do. But, in the household I grew up in, both my grandparents served, but it wasn't it wasn't even an option for an Orthodox Jew to join the military, at least back in 2001, 2002. It wasn't something I really, really wanted to do. And that was the extent of it. Kind of like how I want to start a podcast. Yeah, but that's the extent of it. No one actually does it besides you two. But something I wanted to do. And I turned to my ex-wife one day, we were talking, I'm like, I think I'm going to join the Air Force. She's like, you've wanted to do this for years. Don't let me hold you back. She's like, you're not my problem anymore. And I'm like, fine, I'm going to do it. She's like, okay, I don't care. And so I did. So then I became a reservist in the military. I left for around 6 months for basic training, and I became a lawyer in the Air Force. I do that for around a month to 2 months out of the year. And then I got appointed as a magistrate judge in my county court. So now I deal with only domestic violence cases as well. Intimate partner violence primarily, but really any family members. So even brother on brother, now that they're 40 years old, they get into a bar fight, it's classified as domestic violence. And it's not only married people, it's anyone who have lived together or have a child in common. So we really run the gamut. And interesting fact about domestic violence, because I'm sure you're wondering, around 20% of our victims of domestic violence are male. So a lot of people are like, oh, it's a female area. Well, it is primarily, but it's 20% male as well. So that is a percentage that most people aren't aware of. So that's kind of my education to where I am now.
I'm curious, Joe, about just because you mentioned that stat about domestic violence. I know here in Israel, if a woman makes any sort of complaint about a man, particularly in the context of domestic dispute, then, I'm not saying this is necessarily the law per se, but based on what I've experienced firsthand and based on what I've spoken to others, the police will take immediate action. They'll investigate the man, et cetera, et cetera. Is that the case also where you are? Is it the case that if a woman simply has to make an allegation and instantly the police will treat that, almost as if it actually happened before even coming to any sort of conclusion? Is that the case, more women making those allegations versus men, or is it more sort of equally weighed, whether the man makes the allegation or the woman makes the allegation?
So I'm going to tell you, according to the law, it's exactly the same. Obviously, what I will say, in my court, it's a two-tier test, where this is where males feel that they're getting, quote unquote, the short end of the stick. Is because in my court, there doesn't only need to be an act of domestic violence, but there also needs to be a need for future protection. So if we're talking about physical violence and I have a victim who is smaller, or if I have two parties and one is smaller, one is bigger, and there's a mutual fight, let's just say. So even if she started, let's just say hypothetically, you also have to look for a future need for protection. So I think sometimes that's one aspect where people look at, there also has to be physical harm. So a woman pushing a man is different than a man pushing a woman, even though it may be the same act. So that could be avenue that people kind of get lost in, where yeah, it's the same act, but a 300-pound man slapping a woman is different than a 120-pound man slapping a 300-pound man, at least in my court, which is a civil court. I'm not saying culpability is different, but I'm saying I'm going to be looking at that a little bit differently. In addition, we see this a lot with society, especially police officers. You have to think about what the police see most often. We all fall back on our experiences, hopefully training and experience, but our experience is really what drives us. When you see a situation and 8 out of every 10 times it's one way, when you see it again, your natural inclination is going to go that one way. Should it? No, it shouldn't. You should look at every case as an independent situation. I'm kind of justifying or explaining why it could be perceived that way.
Is there any, I'm curious though, is there any sort of, based on that information, is there any sort of impediment towards somebody trying to take advantage of that by, making an allegation, knowing that it could give somebody leverage? Like, for example, I've spoken to men where they say, that they're soon to be XY. And I'm just using this as an example. I'm not saying it happens all the time, but I'm just curious because you obviously have firsthand experience as a magistrate judge. Would you say that there's no sort of impediment to somebody making an allegation towards somebody just to take the average example? Let's say a woman making an allegation against a man just to sort of get him out of the house, or knowing that that allegation is going to be taken seriously regardless of the truth of the matter. Is there any impediment towards making an allegation just for leverage purposes in the context of a pending divorce?
So this is why, and I don't know anything about the Israeli system. I know the judges and the magistrates in my building take that very seriously on both sides, especially before the holidays. Next week is going to be a very busy week for me for exactly that reason. People making either allegations to try to get either custody of the children for the holidays or make sure the other one doesn't. Male, female, gender doesn't really matter. If you're going through a divorce case and it's found out that you made a false allegation about DV, domestic violence, that will be held against you. It most definitely will, which is why they don't, and I'm tooting my own horn here. I'm not just a regular attorney who has a docket, and I do divorce, and I do support, and I do custody. All I do is DV. So those things that Ben read in the morning, in the beginning, it's this manipulation and control, cycle of violence. I hope that my training gives me the sight to hear both sides and make a decision. But yes, when I hear an accusation and I only hear one side of the story, yeah, obviously that is a detriment to the other side. But we actually bring people back within 2 weeks. So if there's an accusation of DV, yes, someone could get kicked out of the house, someone could lose custody of their kids, but we bring those people back within 2 weeks, which is insane. In no other court in my county or probably in your country can you get a hearing within 10 days. Like it's just not done. But with our cases, because of that, because of everything that you're saying, we bring people in very quickly because we want to get to the truth. And I don't give a continuance, which means if you have not you, y'all, obviously, but if there's an accusation against a perpetrator and the perpetrator wants to go to trial, if my victim says, I want a continuance to hire an attorney, I'm like, no, the perpetrator has every right to go to trial today. And I don't care if I have 7 cases. We're going to trial because I want to know what really happened. And I'm not going to let someone use the system because that belittles real victims.
Wow. And I guess I've only seen this stuff on TV, I guess is probably a fair statement. Is there a whole back and forth with witnesses and the whole thing, or how does that work in the courtroom? Are you actually hearing witnesses? And I know here in this country, they want to push most of it onto the social workers, and the rest of it, the judge you see for a few minutes at a time. Is there the whole back and forth with witnesses and rebuttals and etc.?
Kind of. I mean, everyone has to come to court with their witnesses ready, and they both have an opportunity to ask each party questions. But I don't interview parties. Either they have attorneys or they don't. Around 70% of people don't. So this is a very highly user-driven process. There is no prosecutor. I'm not law enforcement. Unfortunately, I have victims that struggle with mental health. So I actually know that they were the victim. And unfortunately, since it's a civil process, they possibly can't adequately present their case. So we do have staff. We have victim advocates on staff. We have an entire staff set to help both parties, whether it's making copies, learn the rules of evidence. But yeah, I'm pretty much a referee. So, but yeah, no, most of my trials are around an hour to 2 hours long.
Wow. All right. Well, that's good to hear that, voices are heard. That's really important. So as far as your, I guess, Navy experience,
Air Force.
Air Force, why did you choose the Air Force? Just because of JAG on TV? What was the motivation there?
So the Air Force, I was talking to an Army recruiter, and he said the Air Force is the most family friendly. So the Air Force has a program called the IMA program, which stands for Individual Mobilization Augmentee, for those of you who were wondering, which is no one. And they allow me to do my military service during the week and weeks at the time. So if you're a reservist in the Army, let's just say you're doing 1 weekend a month and and then 2 weeks over the summer, I'm able to chunk up my time to do a full 2 weeks or to do a full month. I don't need to do it once a month. So I actually haven't been on duty since August. So wow. I'm able to say, and then my son goes to camp, NTSY Camp Sports in Baltimore. So he goes for a month. So I know that my son does better when he's at my house in general. So, when he's gone for a month, I'll go for 3 weeks because I'm not concerned about him as much. So, and the Air Force offers those incredible opportunities.
Nice. And there's an Air Force base near Cleveland. Where would you be based out of?
So I was based out of Dayton, Ohio. It's called Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. And I just moved to Scott Air Force Base, which is right near St. Louis. I'm actually stationed with another Orthodox attorney, JAG attorney. He just came on. I think there's like 4 of us now. When I started, I was the only one wearing my yarmulke. And now there are 2 males plus myself and 1 female, which was unheard of. I mean, even 5 years ago, it just wasn't done.
And I remember you publishing some articles, and when things came out with Nike and the hijab and articles that you put out. You want to talk about that a little bit? Because again, watching me from afar, it's been amazing to see what you've accomplished.
Yeah, so that whole started with that. There is this girl. She was in the University of Toledo. Wanted to get into the Air Force, and she was a religious Muslim woman. She actually grew up like 20 minutes away from my hometown. And she said, I want to wear my hijab. The Air Force at the time had a policy that they can give you an exception once you're already in. It's like, we can't unilaterally give you an exception until you make an application, and you can't make an application until you're in. Probably something like with the Israeli government, with like applying for something, like, well, you have to be here first. You're like, I don't want to come until I can be there, until I get the exception. So fine. I'm sitting at my base, and my boss comes in. He's like, I just interviewed this incredible woman, but she wants to wear a hijab. You wear a yarmulke. Why don't you go research whether she can wear this and get the exception before she comes in? Well, Chabad rabbis had been like in the Air Force for the past like 20 years. So for a yarmulke, like exceptions were already on the books. So I do all my research, and I try to help this woman. And I can't, like, I write papers, I write letters, and I kind of put her in touch with all the right people. Fine. 3 years down the line, I'm watching like MSNBC, and she's on there in her hijab. And oh, this is my dog. I'm not sure if you can see my doggy. Okay. So she's there. And so I find her on Facebook, and her name is Captain Ouza. I said, by any chance, did you interview with Major Strong? She's like, yeah. I'm like, I think I worked on your recruitment package. She's like, you're the Jewish guy who worked on my package? I'm like, how many Jewish guys are in the Air Force? Of course I'm the Jewish guy. And then we were actually stationed at Patterson, and we became very close friends. She was on TikTok. She got me on TikTok, which is a black hole. Absolutely love it. I have 45,000 followers now. And
what is with TikTok? I sorry to cut you off, but I don't get it. I've always heard anybody like in our, I don't know how old you are, Joe, but Ben and I are the same age. So old. Anybody like over 40 doesn't seem to, I don't know. Most people don't get it. I'm amazed that you're on it. That's another discussion to have.
Oh my gosh.
TikTok.
It feeds my ego. It's a love-hate relationship. I got on originally because of this officer. She's like, oh, we have to do videos together. And her sense of humor, we both believe in the same thing. And obviously I'm not in Israel and politics, but we both believe in like love, inclusion, diversity. Like that's why we're in the Air Force. Like we represent our culture. That diversity that is the United States military, we are that. When we walk into a room, people look at us like we're nuts. And we're like, no, this is what our country is. Our country is a melting pot, and the Air Force is that as well. But her sense of humor is just great. So we made these videos, one where like I'm pretending to be a hostage. We made another one where like people thought like we were on a dating show, and we just made like all these like great videos. And we were interviewed by CBS. We were written up in a newspaper, and we've really been promoting inclusion and love. And like our big thing is like there are topics like we disagree on. There are topics where we talk about, and we're like, we will never be on the same page. But on the other hand, we have so much in common. When it talks about our upbringing, when it talks about even our culture, when it talks about friendship and connection to community, divorce, our communities have so much more in common than we do differences. I also have American privilege. I live in America. I don't have to deal with things that people have to deal with in Israel or on the other side of the borders. So I am a little ignorant when it comes to the conflict, and I could appreciate that. But from where I'm sitting in my country, we have so much more in common, and I think that we need to start focusing on that, because if we keep on talking about whose great grandparents killed whose great grandparents, we're going to keep on going down this cycle. And there's never, I'm not getting into Middle Eastern politics, but who was there first? To me, that argument is going to lead nowhere. I mean, it will just go back to the end of or the beginning of time. Like, it really doesn't matter. What are we going to do now to move forward in peace? Because Israelis and Palestinians don't want their children. I call it the motherhood initiative. And there's a great program that one of my Israeli friends is doing, and I forget what it's called. But like, if we could just get like a whole bunch of mothers together and to kick everyone's butt, like, I think that'd be like really nice, because I'm sure everyone's sick of it. You're sick of it. I don't have the answers. I would be rich and I'd be president if I did. But I'm focused on how we can move forward in a better direction. And I really think it starts with people like you and I, like with us starting these conversations. It's not gonna, there is no magic button. Like it's not going to be a push button policy or a politician. So that's kind of, we focus on our people within our culture, our community, America, and focus on all the incredible things that we can do together, not on the things that draw us apart.
Well
Nice.
said. Well said. Beautiful.
Sorry, I got a little.
No, for sure. It's definitely not we're not a political show, and it's definitely not worth, like you were saying, going down that rabbit hole. But I definitely can relate to your sentiments. So no, I appreciated hearing that.
Yeah.
And so fast forward a little bit. So
Yeah.
you graduated law school. You
Yes.
started working in JAG. Somewhere in there, you became a judge, but you also met somebody.
Yes, I got remarried. She's in the other room. I really want to ask her when we got remarried, but
Not
we
the
got
best question
married.
to ask. I don't think.
I know. You know what? So we started
What's her
dating.
anniversary, honey?
Well, I'm going to explain. It's actually a lot more complicated than that. So she moved to Cleveland, and as I would like to believe, she didn't know who I was, because if she did, she would have never dated me. Though right before we started dating, I was profiled in a magazine for being the top 10 single of Northeast Ohio.
Wow.
What magazine was?
For J Style magazine. Okay, so I mean, I think it was top 10, and there was only 8 that year. But still, I mean, I was still in it.
Was that after the gym workout?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I became a little bit of a gym rat.
Right. Nice.
So around 2 weeks later, we actually matched on dating sites, because that's how people date. And she was wearing a Boston hat, and I had a picture from the Air Force basic training where we went out on my birthday, and we went out to like some like ice cream place, and I'm just gaunt. It's like you can see the I haven't eaten in like 4 months, and you just see like the bone structure in my face. And she's like, "Yeah, I wasn't going to message you. You looked horrible." I'm like, "You were wearing a Boston hat. Like, I'm from Detroit and Cleveland." And but then we matched on 2 separate apps, and we started dating. She just moved to Cleveland. She's incredible. It was a full year before I introduced her to my kids. That was always a very big pet peeve. We are on the Dad podcast. I've had friends who have introduced their children to pretty much everyone they have been dating for over a week. I did not want to be that person. Where I was religiously allowed me to date someone for as long as I wanted to. Brought the kids over on a Friday night, and I remember I was walking up to my house, and I have a side window kind of looking in to my house, and she's on the stairs with like her hand like over her head, and I can just see the nervousness on her face. And I'm like, that's the person I want. Someone as nervous as I am to introduce them to my kids, as she's nervous to meet them. Like, this is not something that we do. This is not something that she does. This is a big deal. And they met her. They obviously, it was a little weird in the beginning, but not really. She's just incredible. She was working in with children at the time. And obviously, I'm not going to marry someone who wasn't incredible with kids, because I have kids. She does not have kids. So I think they call that a unicorn in the dating community.
She was not married before.
Not married before, no children.
Why is it? I'm just curious. I sorry to interrupt if you're in the middle of your story, but I'm like chomping at the bit to ask you this. Why is it that you feel that one? I mean, if I understood you correctly, that one should not introduce somebody that he's dating early on, or is it something that you felt for you personally, or is it something you feel that you wish everybody adhered to? Like, is that like a general policy of yours? Because I thought I caught in what you were saying that you're against it.
Joe Hochheiser, attorney at law, with absolutely no experience in divorce except my own, with no psychological training except in domestic violence.
I love the disclaimer. I love it.
Yeah, like
as a fellow attorney. Yeah,
I've had friends who have dated multiple people. The children, even though it was years later, the children have gone through enough change, and I don't know I have people who've done it and it's been like totally okay. I understand that you want to build a relationship, and if you're only planning on dating for 4 months, after 2 weeks, it may be time. I don't want to say I dated a lot, but I've gone out with a lot. Like I didn't want my children meeting everyone I was dating. Like
I mean, I
don't
can
know
tell
if
you from my own experience
yeah,
being that
please.
kid, my father had several girlfriends growing up, and he lived with some, didn't live with some, but I met a whole bunch of them. But I didn't get along with a bunch of them. B, uh, I don't know. From and then my mother did the complete opposite. I don't even know if she ever dated until I moved out of the house in high school. I have no idea. In my mind, she put everything on hold for me. Um, so, I'm not looking to put everything on hold, but I'm also not looking to have a revolving door of it. It just opens the kids up to a potential hope, or if it goes well, hope that is your next, parent or figure. Or if it goes bad, connecting with somebody and then they're not connected and it's more lost. I think
And
that's the worry there.
another aspect of it, and it was for me, it's a double-edged sword. I wanted to marry someone for the right reasons, and not only because my kids love them. And if your kids absolutely fall in love with someone, maybe you're in that relationship for the wrong reasons or keeping it going. But on the same side, I would choose my children over the person I'm going to marry. So on the same side, I need to make sure that my kids get along with this person as well, because if they don't, I'm picking my kids, and that was the decision I made prior to even dating, that I'm okay being single. I'm not going to get married and jump into something just to check off a box or to make my community happy. But to fall back, so we dated for around a year after that. She became part of the family every other Friday night. My custody arrangement was made when we just got divorced, and it was my mistake in hindsight, but I made it for a 1-year-old child and a 6-year-old child. So everything in there was like, oh, I'll come over my ex-wife's house, 3 times a week at night to help put the kids to bed. I'll come over on Shabbos morning and pick them up and take them to shul and drop them off after lunch. We wrote up this agreement that really worked well with kids that age. So it didn't work well like when my kid is like bar mitzvah, which we could talk about later as well. But all I'm saying is that I was able to really incorporate my children with my relationship on a very slow pace, because, I didn't have them that full time or for that whole weekend or for 3 nights in a row. We were going to move in together. We bought a house, and my grandmother was very sick. And my parents are like, come to Detroit. We'll invite her family. We'll get you married in the backyard, and, just be a small wedding. And then in a year from now, you guys can do your celebration, And so we went to Detroit. We moved on Thursday. We unpacked the last box, and we were going to Detroit. As I said, my grandmother was very sick at the time. As soon as we unloaded our last box, we were changing to go out to eat. My father called and told me that my grandmother just died.
Wow.
Which in most families, she was old. She lived a very full life. And in my family, we all kind of chuckled. We're like, this is great. We all had airfare to come in anyways. We're all going to be there. This is just like incredible.
And your father, the travel agent, was like, I figured it out.
Exactly. And to top it all off, my sister was going to do an upsharing for her son on Sunday after our wedding, because we were all there anyways.
One second. That's a ceremonial haircut at the age of 3 for a son.
Yes. So when in certain customs, or certain Jewish customs, the boy gets his first haircut at 3. So my sister pushed it off for around a month because we were all going to be there. So as I spoke at my grandmother's funeral, we called her Sofa. And I said, you know, Sofa always made sure that everything was always about her. And once again, she made sure that everything was always about her. So we had a funeral on Friday. My parents and family met Rebecca's parents and family for the first time on Friday night dinner. We had a tent out in the backyard. People were coming in like, Mazel Tov, condolences. Like people just didn't really know. So my mother on Sunday morning, we had a 10 o'clock wedding. My mother was allowed to go. We went over to the mourner's house afterwards because my aunts did not go. And we were just like, just rocking it out for a funeral, birthday party for my nephew later on that afternoon. Then we moved in together. We lived together for a year. And then we had we had a party celebration in Ithaca, New York, where she was from. And that was a small, like 100-person, a DJ, kind of like a real fun party. Interesting, there's no kosher caterers in Ithaca. So we found an Israeli caterer who agreed to do a kosher wedding through the Chabad kitchen at Cornell. So even that, it was a very cool little mashup. And my wife is just incredible for being like so flexible. Like my parents telling her, or not telling, but why don't you get married in our backyard? And she just like, she didn't even know what was going. She was like, okay, yeah. She bought her dress on Amazon. Like we were like so not prepared for that. We thought it was gonna be like 10 people in my backyard. My parents, like there was people in and out of that house. There was tons of people there, but that's just how my parents roll. And so that was right before COVID. And everyone's like, oh, you had two separate weddings because of COVID? We're like, no. We actually did it before it was cool. So and then we've been married since then. So that's why, Yoel, in the beginning, when you were saying about your anniversary, we actually have two separate ones. So I don't have to celebrate either one of them now. Okay. They cancel each other out. It's like offsetting penalties. You just repeat third down. Wait,
so just so I'm clear, how long were you were divorced? What was the period of time between divorce and remarriage? Just so I have the
4+ years.
Got it. And you knew you wanted to get remarried, or that this kind of just happened when you met her, type of thing? Like I
was never gonna get remarried. Marriage is the worst. I did everything right. I went to the right schools. I said the right things. I prayed to the right God. I got married when I was supposed to get married. I learned. I thought I was a good husband. I was a horrible husband. I thought I was a good husband. I was doing everything I thought I was supposed to do. And this is my thank you. And being divorced, maybe in Israel, it's a little different, possibly. Being observant or part of an observant community and being divorced, male or female, it sucks. Judaism or Orthodoxy is family focused, family centrist. Going to a family Shabbos meal with a whole bunch of families there and you're the single guy, it's like you feel like you should be sitting at the kids' table on Thanksgiving. Like it stinks. No, I was never going to get remarried. I was going to have some fun. I was going to be single. I was going to focus on my kids. And then I met a girl who was like, yeah, marriage is not my number one priority. You know, I'm just living life. She traveled. She lived in Australia, London, Portland, San Diego. Like she's lived in all these incredible places. And this was just another stop.
I don't know why she picked Cleveland, but
Cleveland Clinic brought her here. It was not, I mean, it was her choice, but she was recruited to be here. She's pretty incredible. But yes, I was not planning on getting remarried. She actually makes fun of me because she's like, well, what do you want in your life? I said, I want to do as much military service as possible in places as far away as possible. She's like, wow, you sound like a real winner.
That's great. Well, I'm just curious, why do you say, as I get like completely distracted by my cat, who I don't know how much she's been in the background. She's been purring pretty much the entire podcast. I'm just curious, why you said that you were a horrible husband. Was that something that you realize in retrospect in your new relationship now?
Yes. I was very young. I mean, I thought I was a bad father until I thought I was a good father until I was 30 and raising a child. Very reactionary, very angry, very, very upset where I was. Everything was sad. I was in a sad place. And, divorce, sometimes divorce is people's fault, especially when you're talking about domestic violence, cheating, like there are reasons. But in general, like divorce is two people who shouldn't be married. So I was in a relationship with someone I shouldn't have been married to for 10 years. And the thing holding me back personally, which I'm sure that both of you could relate to, is I didn't want to fail. And divorce, in my mind at the time, was failure. I don't fail at anything. I succeed. I have a goal. There's a challenge, and I accomplish that. And I've been doing that my entire life. So for me to concede that I failed in my marriage, at least at that time, it's like, no, I don't fail. I'm going to keep on pushing through. And then you're digging yourself in a deeper hole, alienating, not acknowledging that there's issues, or going to marriage counseling, but not really putting through all of it. And then eventually someone checks out. It doesn't really matter. But then you still push through as if it's still going to work out. And you're like, oh, I'm a romantic optimist. No, you're not. You're dumb. Like you're in a bad, negative place and you keep on doing it. And so, yeah, no sad, depressed, angry partner is going to be a good partner to their other partner. I mean, the yelling matches, and my friends kind of make fun of me. They're like, yeah, you guys were in temple. You guys were in temple yelling at each other. I'm like, yeah, we really didn't like each other. They're like, yeah, that was like 4 years into your marriage. I'm like, well, so at least that's how it was for me. In the beginning, after our divorce, we were very cordial because we were both happy to be out. And we used to sit together at temple, and we used to joke that people thought we were contagious, like divorce was. And only half joking, because once people see how happy you are afterwards, they're like, oh, maybe divorce is the answer. But like people like didn't sit next to us. People are like very worried, like, why are they so happy now? And so and then of course, you guys start getting those phone calls from community members, be like, hey, so when did you know? Have you guys gotten those phone calls from friends or community members?
You mean friends that are going through it themselves or considering
going through it?
I could speak. Ben could answer for himself. From my perspective, it's more when it's kind of pretty much happening. Unfortunately, I get a lot of those. I'll let Ben answer. I have a follow-up question to what you said, but I'll let Ben answer that question. Ben?
Yeah, I don't think anyone calls me because they know how I feel about the whole thing.
Okay.
I'm more of the post support or gonna happen support, but the how did you know is not my venue.
Yeah, I don't answer that question either.
Yeah, but I wanted to ask you though, and maybe there's a question that Ben maybe would relate to, so I'm going to ask it instead of Ben, because you said that divorce happens between a couple that shouldn't have been together. Can one argue conversely that divorce happens when one or both of the couple don't commit to doing the work necessary to maybe strengthen the relationship when times are tough? Like, who says, I'm not trying to argue with you, and I'm not saying I necessarily disagree with what you're saying, but I'm curious on the flip side, who says that a couple necessarily wasn't good for one another? Maybe they just, one or both of them just didn't put in the work or decided not to put in the work that's often necessary for a commitment to last through the hard times. Is that
absolutely? That's such a fair statement. My therapist compared a marriage and a relationship to an escalator going the wrong way. Like if you just stay status quo, if you're not trying to walk up, you will go down. So that's what you have to constantly be working on that. And if you don't, you will end up at the bottom of the staircase. That was not my situation. I would like to believe, if you would ask my ex-wife, we can call her, but we're not. If you would ask her if she's happy that we are divorced, she will say absolutely, and we should have. Clearly, as one party, I thought I was putting in the effort. In hindsight, she was not the person I was supposed to be married to. But I do believe that there are those situations. Unfortunately, in my community and in a lot of observant communities, sometimes you have one who doesn't practice in the same way, and the other party, so you have that aspect. Sometimes parties just check out for whatever reason. But then again, to kind of answer your question in a lawyerly way, if one party checks out and doesn't value the relationship enough to put in the effort, doesn't that mean that they shouldn't be married to each other?
I would.
So I mean,
yeah,
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, I get that. Like I was speaking to somebody recently about that. Like, don't you feel that it could have lasted or something like that? All these sort of like after the fact questions, and I just answered, well, I don't, because it didn't, type of thing, right? So kind of what you were just saying, which is a more sort of philosophical type of way of looking at it. But I hear what you're saying there. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
Ben, what do you got on that?
Uh,
How much more time do we have?
I know what Ben has.
To me, marriage is one of those life commitment things. And, you have 5 bad years, but you take 5 more years to invest in it, or time will tell, or, as Yoel says, his lawyer was telling him, like, if you just waited 5, 6 more years, then you and your ex would have been in like the golden years of when the kids are getting married. There's going to be out of the house. You guys get to go on, live your life that you've been working on for so many years, So I have a different philosophy on the whole thing. From what I've heard and what I've read, and it's just as Will Smith and Jada Pinkett Smith said once, just don't give up, and that's it.
So let me fight with you, okay, Ben?
All right.
Because Ben and I have been there before about other topics, but people have said to me, stay married for the kids. And I say, I got divorced for my kids. I did not want my children to model their concept of love and marriage off of what they saw between their mom and I. So I understand what you're saying, Ben, but you have to realize that there's other people involved too. And is it fair? Yes, divorce comes with it. My therapist, and I don't love the word, but my therapist said it's better to be from a broken home than in a broken home. Now, I don't love the word from a broken home, but conceptually. So I guess what's your response to that? That you're that's kind of selfish, because there's children involved too, and they deserve to see a father and a mother saying, hey, this is not love.
Fair. So I'll say no situation is the same. I'll say a lot of these divorces, the kids have no clue. And as long as the kids have no clue, the fight to keep it should still go on, because the kids have no clue. Once they do have a clue, that's when the broken happens, and it takes years to recover from that. So if you guys keep it between yourselves, and you should still be fighting for it. If if it trickles down and it does, like my brother says, when I was 8 months old when my parents got divorced, and my brother said when they sat him down and told him, my brother was like, "Oh, well, it's about time." And my middle brother, he was really upset. So, me, I was 8 months old. I had nothing to do with it. But in my mind, growing up, I thought it was because of me. So again, there are ripple effects that you have no clue about. And, even the worst home may still be the best home for the kids, having 2 families there, so that they don't feel that hurt that's that's on them all the time. I want to be here. I want to be there. Why can't I talk to this person? Why can't I talk to that person? What, again, I think to me, divorce for a child is the worst thing in the entire world.
I 100%. And if anyone thinks like divorce is the answer, first off, I tell everyone, you got to go to marriage counseling and you got to give it time. It's not one session. You really have to work towards it. But I also tell people you don't get divorced to be happy. If anyone thinks they're getting divorced to be happy, they're absolutely wrong. You get divorced to put yourself in a position to be happy again. But that also comes with work. And I don't care. I don't care if there was domestic violence. I don't care if there was cheating. I don't care if the person is now married to the Pope. It doesn't matter. There's always something within your own characteristics that needs to be improved. So oftentimes we're like, I don't need help. It was all her fault. Or a female saying, oh, it was all his fault. What made you attracted to that defective person then? Even if you want to go there, even if you want to say it was all that person's fault, that person is horrible. Okay, well, you still married them. So what deficit do you have that you married such a defective person? And I'm not saying people are defective. I'm saying people who refuse to acknowledge that they have things to work on as well. But yes, Ben, I would agree with you. Marriage is ideal, and staying marriage is the ideal. And you have a different perspective than I grew up with, and I respect that 100%.
Yeah, I think also that, and I agree. There's validity to both sides here, and I think I agree with what Ben is saying, that it really does depend on everyone's circumstances. Like some people, like you were saying, Joe, some people are just so glad to be out of it. They were both miserable. But I think in a lot of instances, I remember there's a Talmud that says that a bad marriage is worse than death. It says in an ancient Talmud. And I remember telling a friend of mine said, yo, you see, and, I was married for 18 years. And I said, well, I didn't feel that way. I didn't feel like it was a terrible marriage. And it's funny. I don't want to speak for my ex-wife, but I think she would probably say it was. Like, I remember being in family therapy, and the therapist was trying to get us to a place of like where things were great. And he's like, talk about your first date. And she's like, I'd rather not. I'm like, what the fuck? Like, but I think what happens is, I think that a lot of times, the point I'm trying to make is that I think in some cases, genuinely, someone can say it's better for the kids to not see that type of relationship going forward. But I think a lot of times one or both of the spouses may use that as an excuse to say, oh, the marriage was terrible from the outset. Because I really believe that in my case, it was not. And only when, from my perspective, when my ex-wife decided she was done, then sure, from that point on, then yes, it was not exactly a great model for my children to see. But kind of tying into what Ben was saying, for the first 15, 16 years, everything was fine. I mean, you look at the family photos, and obviously photos could tell a different story than reality. I'm aware of that. But I just think that there's a propensity out there to kind of, recreate history once things go bad, rather than doing the work necessary to stay committed, and that's something that I think is just part of the culture. And a lot of times people tend to forget that. So anyway.
I mean, there's no question that our society is a button pushing society, or pill popping, which, by the way, if you need medication, absolutely, it's good for you. But we all want to push
across the screen.
Yeah, exactly. Magistrate Joe says, take your medication. We all want to push a button and make everything all better. We do it with our kids. We do it with ourselves. No one wants to put in the work, and really marriage does involve a lot of work. So there's absolutely that concept. When I moved, I found an entire shoebox of anniversary and birthday cards. And my wife now and I were looking through them, and they were all the same type of cards. I know you annoyed the hell out of me, but I still love you. And they were all like those type of, and she's like, holy shit, like you guys were having problems early, weren't you?
Wow.
Like, oh my God. And like looking through these cards, I'm like, oh, this is the most depressing thing. And I wasn't married for 17 years. And we actually did have the same conversation with our therapist. Try to think back to a time when you were happy. And my marriage probably was different because I probably did get married too young and for all the wrong reasons, but I was also divorced by 31. And a conversation I was having with my ex-wife at the time, I'm like, we're really lucky. Like, well, I'm really good looking. I'm like, we're young, we're good looking. We're like, we have life to live. In my mind, it was going, or in our mind, it was going to happen. And I was happy that we were able to do it younger as opposed to waiting. Unfortunately, I see people do it like, oh, last kid goes to college and now you're 55 and doing it. So I was happy that we did it when we did. I was able to get remarried. I know that she dates. Hopefully one day she'll get remarried because nothing will make my life easier.
I don't know if that's always true, by the way. I think I think there's I guess again, as always, it sounds like it's like 3 lawyers in a room, although Ben's not a lawyer, but it's like every case depends on its circumstances. But I don't know. I think, people tend to think that once their, ex-spouse moves on with someone else, life gets much simpler in terms of interactions. And I don't know if that's always the case, but I mean, obviously, I hope I don't know her, but I hope for her sake that she does get remarried. I'm not suggesting I wouldn't want her to get remarried, but I just don't know if that would necessarily have any impact in your life necessarily. But I don't know. It's just speaking to other men and my own personal experience and other men's experiences. I don't know if an ex-spouse being in another relationship necessarily matters. I don't know.
Yeah, my current wife has made me a better father as well. So like I'm talking probably ignorant from my position.
Stay tuned for part 2 coming next week.
Thank you for listening to the Too Dad to Quit podcast. Available at toodadtoquit.com. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode.